Anthology presents The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, adapted and directed by Jeff Ronan, performed by Jonathan Grunert.
You want to know my story? You want to know whether or not I'm crazy? When I was young, I was diagnosed with hyperacusis, which is a very sharp, focused sense of hearing. So when others say they can't hear the things I do, it doesn't mean they're not there. Just that they're deep under the surface, hiding, waiting for the ones who know how to listen, to dig them up. So I will tell you my story, but do not call me crazy. I'd looked after the old man ever since I'd left my studies. 8 years I'd been with him, waiting on his every need. Here you are, eat up. There. I'd cared for him, loved him as if he were my own father. He'd always been good to me, never given me a reason to think otherwise. There's no reason I would ever want harm to come to him. And yet, why should I feel this way? His eye. It must have been his eye. Pale blue with a film over it. Whenever his eye fixed upon me, I would seize up, caught in its hold. The eye was its own entity, mocking me, terrifying me. I slowly grew to despise it, wanting, needing to rid myself of it. And the only way to do that, the only way to earn my peace, would be to kill the old man. I had to be careful. You would have been amazed to see just how careful I was. I was never kinder to the old man than during the week before I killed him, drawing his bath, combing his hair, tending to his every need throughout the day. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening large enough for my head, I carefully put in a dark lantern, all closed so that no light shone out. And then I moved slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. After a great length of time, I had placed my head within the opening far enough so that I could see him, lying in his bed. And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern very cautiously, just so much that a single thin ray fell upon his eye. Closed. For 7 long nights I did this, always just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man I needed to kill, but his hellish eye. And each morning I'd enter his room cheerfully, going about my business as usual. I'd bid him good morning and prepare his breakfast. There we are now, eat every bite. So you see, there's no reason he would have suspected anything was out of the ordinary. That's how very careful, how very smart I was. This continued on for a whole week, until the 8th night. The clock struck 12, and I silently padded towards the old man's room. I paused. The wind, I told myself. Just the wind. I stalked towards the room even slower than the other nights. Finally, I reached his door. I've never felt so alive. So much power coursing through my veins. His life rested in my hands, and he had no idea. The old man awoke, as if startled. You may assume that I drew back from the door, but the room was pitch black. I knew he could not see me. I pressed on, silent. I snaked my head in and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening.
Who's there?
For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. But I never heard him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I had done night after night. An eternity passed, but I knew he was still there, listening, waiting. When I could stand it no longer, I resolved to open a sliver of a crevice in the lantern. So softly I opened it that not a creak was heard, until, at length, a simple dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out the crevice and fell upon his eye. It was open, wide open, perfectly, horribly encircled by the beam of light. I could hear it all the way from here. The beating of the old man's heart. It grew quicker and quicker and louder and louder. His terror must have been extreme, and yet we both still stood there, unmoving, entranced. But the beating kept growing to the point that I thought the heart must burst. It was deafening. Surely the sound would be heard by a neighbor. I gripped the lantern tightly in my hands. Now was the time. His hour had come. It was done. I pulled the lantern away and examined the corpse, placing my hand upon his heart. No pulse. As the night drew on, I took every precaution in concealing the body. I moved the old man into the tub. Then I set about dismembering the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs, and then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited the pieces beneath. But when I came to his head, no, his eye, there, the spoon from the breakfast tray. There, all gone. His eye would trouble me no more. Once his pieces were disposed beneath the floor, I replaced the boards, so that no human eye, not even his, could detect anything wrong. Surely you were afraid now, you must think. But what had I to fear? There were no stains, no blood. Not a trace was left. The tub had caught all. Welcome, officer. It appeared a neighbor had heard the old man's dying scream. I invited him in. I offered the officer something to drink and started the kettle. The scream, I admitted, was my own. I woke from a truly dreadful nightmare. The gentleman I look after is out in the country this weekend and is not expected back until early next week. The officer asked if he could look around. I was more than happy to oblige. I smiled confidently and led him throughout the house. I encouraged him to search, and search well, and led him directly into the old man's chamber. As the officer searched, I glanced around, smirking at my careful work. Not a single element was out of place. Not even the spoon. The one I used to silence his hideous eye. Oh, this? Just finishing up polishing the silverware. Let me get you that tea. I handed him the mug and grinned. So sure was I of my victory that I offered him up the very utensil that had secured my peace from the evil eye. Here, this is freshly cleaned. I suggested he sit down and rest. Surely he was tired. How cleverly I had tricked him. How calm I was, acting as if I had nothing to hide. I was euphoric. I could feel the power coursing through me again. I chatted of everyday things with the officer, but could hardly pay attention, barely able to suppress my giddiness. But after some time, I began to grow pale. My head ached, and I could hear a faint ringing in my ears. My temples began to throb. The officer continued to talk on and on, unaware of my discomfort. Why wouldn't he leave already? The thumping in my head grew worse. How could he not see I was in pain? The ringing grew louder and focused in until I realized that the noise was not coming from within my ears. It was a low, dull, quick sound, much like... Oh, God. No. It can't be. It's not possible. I tried talking louder to mask the sound. I began pacing around the room, growing more and more animated. Yet still the officer smiled and chatted pleasantly. Was it possible he couldn't hear it? God, no. He heard. He suspected. He knew. He was making a mockery of my horror. I couldn't go on any longer. Anything was better than this agony. I felt I must scream or die. And still, louder, louder, louder. I admit it. Tear up the planks. Here. It is the beating of his hideous heart.
Performance by Jonathan Grunert. Direction by Jeff Ronan. Sound design by Jason Marin. Music by Alex Liberatore. Anthology is produced by Rachel Liu. Visit anthologypodcast.com for all episodes, bios, contact info, and more. And most importantly, thank you for listening. Jeff Ronan is a New York City-based actor, director, and writer. You can check out his work at jeffronan.com. Jason is a filmmaker based in New York. You can check out his projects at jason-marin.com. Alex is a composer for all types of media. You can check him out at alexliberatore.com.